Welcome, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar series. My name is Rose Boulet and I oversee the Office of Parent Services. Today's presentation is entitled Partnering with Families to Foster Equity and Inclusion, an Introduction to Advocacy, Inclusion, and Support Services available to all students for education, connection, and support. With me today are Dr. Shelly Perdomo Ahmed, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Advocacy, Inclusion, and Support Programs, Dr. Dave Neely, Director of Diversity Education and Training. They will both lead you in today's discussion. A question and answer session will follow after the presentation. So we kindly ask that you leave your questions until the end. As we've done in the past, we will use the chat feature to share important links with you, while you use the Q&A feature to submit questions. This presentation is being recorded, and a copy will be available within a few days on the OPS YouTube channel for your future use. Welcome, Dr. Perdomo Ahmed and Dr. Neely. Please, you may now start your presentation.
Rose, thank you so much. Thank you to all the wonderful parents who, are with us, and guardians and other family members that may be joining us. I love to do these presentations in person, but I also understand the context that we're in. So nevertheless, it's great to see and be here with you all. My name is Shelly Perdomo Ahmed, and I serve as Assistant Vice Chancellor to our Advocacy, Inclusion, and Support Programs. And I've been working at UMass Amherst for 22 years. And I've had the pleasure of working with Rose for many years and my colleague Dave Neely. And I've had the pleasure of working in academic affairs and student affairs. And so most of my work has been really in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and providing holistic support for students, and also working very closely with upper level administrators on policy and other areas focusing on DEI. Dave?
Thank you so much, Shelly. Good to be with you all this evening as well. I'm Dave Neely, Director of Diversity Education and Training. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I've been at UMass now for about 12 years. I'm an alum of UMass, where I earned my doctorate, and have been working supporting staff and students and student leaders around diversity education and training. So being able to help our staff and students develop skills to learn and engage across many different types of difference in their lives here at UMass. So glad to be with you this evening.
Sorry, I found myself muted. Thank you, Rose. So before we actually begin to discuss, our agenda for this evening, I want to take the opportunity to review our land acknowledgement. The University of Massachusetts Amherst acknowledges that it was found and built on unceded homelands of the Potomac Nation of the land of the Narawak community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters as important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Pocumtuck had connections with these lands for millennia. Over 400 years of colonization, when Pocumtuck peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquin relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes Mashpee, Anaquino, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, Mohican communities, and Abenaki and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These Native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. We also acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land-grant university. As part of the Moral Land Grant Act, portions of the land from 82 Native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build this university. As an active first step towards decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the Native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on, and the indigenous homelands on which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship to these living lands and waters. Thank you. We've also provided the link there so you can review the land acknowledgement and how we actually came to work collaboratively with our Native community and tribes nearby to develop this land acknowledgement. Dave?
Thank you, Shelley, for bringing us in with our land acknowledgement this evening. Before we move forward, we want to share a little bit with you about what we're hoping to do today in our agenda for the evening. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose, what brings us here this evening, and then we want to set the stage by walking you through some slides to point out some of the major historical events for Gen Z, and many of our kind of most traditionally aged students are in Gen Z. So there are some really important things that have happened for them in their lives that you know well, but want to remind us of what that means as they enter and then stay through their time at UMass Amherst. Then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion that are really important for Gen Z, both some challenges and some opportunities that are unique for this generation. We want to, of course, share some resources from our advocacy, inclusion, and support programs, where both Shelley and I work, resources that maybe be really useful for you to know about and to be able to share with the students in your families. And then finally, we want to, again, the title of the session is about, how valuable parents and family members and other supporters are in fostering some of our campus values around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we want to share some recommendations, some food for thought about how you can open those dialogues and be a partner in supporting equity and inclusion on campus through your engagement with your students and children. Finally, we'll leave some time for questions that you may have as we move through the webinar this evening. I'll pass it back to you, Shelley.
Thanks, Dave. So Dave already briefly went over some of the purpose. What I'd like to share before I review it a little bit more is what we're not going to do today is engage in a deep conversation around campus environmental health and safety protocols regarding COVID-19. I'm sure some of you may have questions around that, but that really is out of our purview. And I know that, part of in the parents' Facebook page as well, there have been some questions around, the vaccination, religious exemptions, and questions around, lifting of the mask mandates. Those are questions, unfortunately, neither Dave or I are equipped to answer. And so I just wanted to share that with you all before we begin to discuss a little bit more of the purpose of today. So as Dave said, we're going to be offering insights on the mindset of our students and your children, in terms of their aspirations and concerns and, the way that they view and understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to introduce resources, ways that you can certainly remain in connection with myself and certainly Dave and ask us any questions. We'll make sure to include our emails as well. And also we want to be able to provide you all with resources and ways that you all can engage your family members, your students, your children in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes they're easy conversations and sometimes they're quite challenging conversations, particularly, I'm sure you all have questions around, campus climate issues that have occurred, that continue to occur and that have occurred last semester. More than happy to address any questions around that. But really just looking forward and excited to sharing this information and being part of this presentation with you all as well. Dave?
So again, as we're moving into this presentation, we want to share and make sure that you're familiar with the values that we hold at UMass Amherst. We oftentimes talk about these as being our aspirational values. As any institution, we are on a journey towards these values ourselves. And yet these are really what guide our work with students and what we expect from our community members. So as you see on the screen, UMass Amherst has a longstanding commitment to social progress and social justice. We value diversity and equity and strive for inclusive excellence everywhere on campus, in our classrooms, in the research labs, in the residence halls where many of our students live, workspaces, and beyond. And additionally, on this slide, we have the link there, umass.edu/diversity is the webpage for our Office of Equity and Inclusion. Shelley and I, our work focuses within student affairs and campus life, and we are guided and partner with our campus-wide Office of Equity and Inclusion that offer resources and support and information as well. And so want to remind you that that is a great resource for you to visit, to learn more about different opportunities for students, for your children, and other things that we're doing on campus to support those values. Shelley.
Thanks, Dave. So now we're going to take an opportunity where I would like to share some images of some important national events that have happened that have really shaped the lives of our Generation Z, our students. And so when we're talking about Generation Z, we are talking about your children and students who were born between the years of 1995 to 2010, roughly 2011. And so we wanted to share these visuals because you'll start to realize how it is that these national incidents have really shaped how our students come to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, but more importantly, how they come to understand and trust or distrust government systems of higher education and even administrators at times. So I'm going to go ahead and start and show you these images. So this was 9/11 and World Trade Center attack, and this was in 2001. Hurricane Katrina, which occurred in 2005. You have Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone, and you have the Virginia Tech shooting that happened roughly around 2007. You have the election of Barack Obama, the first Black, or you can say biracial president of the United States. Around age 7, you had the incident of Edward Snowden, which was a former intelligence consultant who leaked highly classified information out, and this was around 2013. You have the re-election of Barack Obama. You have the shooting of Michael Brown in 2014 that really started to get quite a bit of attention around violence and engagement between community and police presence. This here was the Charleston church shooting, which was roughly around 2015, and the case against Dylann Roof. And here, for the first time ever, you have the White House acknowledging publicly, the allyship and the presence and the importance of our LGBTQ citizens here in the US. And I would say even across the world. You have here the election of Donald Trump. We have the Charlottesville white supremacist incident that really kind of shook many of us. You have here the Women's March, age 20, all of us, COVID, impact of COVID. And, we all experienced this in this past summer against, of course, the community, and also, once again, the relationship between citizens and violence and police brutality and relationship there. So. And then we have the January 6th, folks would say insurrection, there's a host of names for these, for this particular incident. And I wanted to take this opportunity to end here with two sheroes, really, Greta and Malala, who are part of Generation Z, who are incredible leaders, outspoken, brilliant young women who truly are utilizing their power and their voice and, their organization skills and organizing and activism skills, particularly around social media, to really bring attention to not only the education of women and violence against women, but also the climate change and the impact of climate change on our country. And so I'm sharing this image here of Generation Z, A Century in the Making. It's an outstanding book. If you have an opportunity, review it, but Corey C. Miller and Megan Grace do an outstanding job with research around understanding this particular generation. But overall, I wanted to share these visuals with you, not only because I'm a visual learner, but for you to have an understanding of the national climate, right? And the national incidents that have really shaped the way that our current student body, your children, have experienced, not only diversity, equity, inclusion, but these particular socio-political and economic, issues have really shaped how our students actually trust or even distrust whether things will change in this country or things will be changing for the better by institutions and of higher education and government and even health. And so I hope that was helpful to you all in helping you kind of get an idea of some of those major national incidents that have happened on in our time that have really shaped how our students and how your children view us and sometimes the world. Dave?
Thank you so much, Shelley. It's always wonderful to work together with you and such a brilliant colleague. I'm grateful for the ways that Shelley, has helped us to get a sense of the broader picture. So oftentimes in our work on campus, we focus on those individual incidents and supporting individual students, and yet we are shaped by those broader patterns, happening somewhat locally sometimes, or in Massachusetts, across the US and globally, even in this moment today. So I appreciate your always helping bring that broader frame to our work. So we want to focus a little bit more at this point about what are some of the challenges and opportunities relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion for the generation that many of our undergraduate students belong to. In particular, when it comes to race, Gen Z is the most racially diverse generation to date. May not be surprising. We know in some states there's already people of color, BIPOC people are the majority of the population, and those trends are continuing to shape the populations on our college campuses today. And additionally, we have a quote here, the boxes no longer fit, right? And so the racial categories that have, kind of been used for many years, they don't really work for this generation and for the younger generations that will be entering higher education in the future. We have ever increasing populations and percentages of students who are multiracial or mixed race. This is a recent book that was just published that we're spending some time with, that talks about the ways that we can better support and frame resources and support and advocacy for students who may not belong to one racial group. And of course, our census categories are beginning to catch up and to be able to better kind of understand the complexities of those racial identities. So there's this one statistics there that's that between 2010 and 2016, the number of students indicating more than one race doubled. And again, now we're looking back 4 years, so that's a pattern that's continuing to shift. So even for those of us who may have gone to high school or gone to college, or our high school experiences may be very different from those of students entering and currently on our campus. I'm going to pass it back to Shelley.
Thank you, Dave. So this is by far the most diverse generation yet, right? We have, this generation has higher rates of individuals that identify as LGBTQ and acceptance of gender fluidity and identifications. We see that in our work with our Stonewall Center and, our LGBTQ student groups as well. In terms of work that we're doing with them around, bathrooms, right, and signage, and being mindful of the fact that, more and more of this generation are identifying as non-binary and identifying with gender fluidity. They're growing up in an increasingly more diverse world that has set the stage to be more open-minded and cultivate a stronger desire for inclusion and equality. I can tell you, Dave and I and Rose, we see it every day in the work that we do, not only with our students, but also this generation is really shaping staff and faculty on how they approach conversations and partnerships and initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion for the best, I would say, for the better. This generation is more accepting of difference, but its members will go to great lengths to avoid viewpoints and challenge their own. And so here is where I think institutions of higher education play a critical role. And some of the work that Dave is going to talk about later is central to really allowing students to engage in conversations respectfully across difference, and to be able to respectfully talk about different viewpoints, because we're all conditioned very differently and our experiences and our upbringings are incredibly different. And it does shape how we understand people and how we understand each other, and the world, and so for this generation, balancing respect and free speech is also fraught with for a generation raised to recognize the harm of bullying. So a lot of the work that we've been doing at UMass as well is not only engaging in these trainings and conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also having conversations around free speech and freedom of expression. Yes, and there are some things that, someone may say that could be a bit disrespectful or challenging, but there are ways to be able to engage in those conversations instead of, completely canceling and not engaging at all, I also want to make sure to tap on the point that I was mentioning earlier, and how the national and historical and the macro context does shape what happens in our institutions of higher education. And so, what I am seeing, not only in my work at UMass, but also in my engagement, just in consulting and conversations with other colleagues, is that our students have a deep distrust. They have distrust of institutions, which in turn means there's distrust of administrators, which also creates an increased level of pessimism on what could possibly change, right? So, this particular generation has a growing sense that the world isn't fair and that there's optimism about the country. About the country's future is falling in the context of the global pandemic and national unrest. And so that's why it was important for me to share those visuals with you, so that you have an understanding of those things that have impacted them and why it is that they have this particular understanding of the world, right? They believe that government should do more to solve problems, but have major distrust in institutions, especially the police, followed by healthcare, state government, the military, the US government. And I would also say that institutions of higher education also fall in this list as well. For this generation, offering lip service will not work. You know, I was just commenting with a colleague that during my generation, when there were challenges or things that we wanted to be seen fixed at our university or colleges, we had conversations with administrators. And if those things weren't done, then you created a list of demands. That's not necessarily the case. With this generation, they actually give you the list of demands and then engage you in the conversation, you know. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I have seen firsthand that, you know, this generation, your children mean business. When they are committed to equity and in addressing any injustice, they really do move forward and work with administrators to really hold them accountable to ensure that things do shift and change for the better. And so the last thing I'd like to touch on before I turn it over to Dave is, you know, I admire how our Generation Z and my niece, my nieces are part of this generation as well, how savvy they are, you know, in really, you know, organizing and utilizing technology and tools to change the system. You know, they rely on homegrown social media movements. They utilize Instagram, as you all know. They utilize Facebook. They utilize TikTok. Many of you probably have seen, you know, some of our own students say, you know, UMass, do better because this is what you're not doing, right? And so they're organizing young activists and really connecting online to push for reform at many levels. You know, and this is not just happening at UMass, it is happening nationwide. You know, we are seeing more white allies. The white allyship in fight against racism and injustice is central. You know, if you realize and notice some of the organizing that was happening and activism that was happening during the summer months, you know, it was probably by far the most diverse, you know, group of activism and group of people that I have seen in a very, very long time. I would say that this generation listens to influencers to get their word out to organizations and community. They are, the activism really is being done on it's digital activism. It's the norm. Whereas years ago, it was in person. A lot of it is being done online to get people organized and mobilized. An expectation of this generation is to go beyond the traditional boundaries to address concerns in society at large and to make ongoing progress on systemic issues. So, you know, it's not enough to just say, okay, I addressed this point. You know, they really do think about, you know, equity and inclusion for all. It's not just, you know, we're providing this opportunity for one group of students and not necessarily considering the entire, I would say a holistic approach to equity and inclusion. And their influence is growing. You know, we see this in the work that I do. They no longer tolerate past patterns of systemic racism. Their voices need to be heard and their concerns need to be addressed. We see this with lists of demands, but we also see it in, you know, their interaction, particularly certainly with me and some other administrators, in terms of they will make their voices heard, you know, in public settings, but they'll also make their voices heard through that digital activism. And as you all know, as many family members, you get to see some of those videos and some of those posts on Instagram. And so, you know, and it's quite large, obviously, in terms of the impact, and it's spread widely. So it's important to know that the research also indicates that the campus racial climate always mirrors that of the national climate. So if there is nationally, there is political and socioeconomic unrest, there is a matter of time, it's only a matter of time before it starts to manifest itself on our campus as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dave that is going to, discuss a little bit of our resources and programs and things that we do to equip our students to better engage and have conversations around DEI.
Thank you so much. Yes, and in particular, we're going to focus on some resources within student affairs and campus life, which is most of the support that we provide co-curricular, right? The outside of the classroom, knowing that there are many resources within academic affairs, within the various schools and colleges and majors. Even including the general education diversity requirements that every student here completes 2 courses, that are focused on diversity in the classroom, where our work focuses mostly on their engagement with one another, their learning outside of the classroom. And we do that in a number of ways. Wanted to bring you into just kind of one main web page. This is the front page for student affairs and campus life. Which is umass.edu/student life. And on that page in particular, up on the top bar, there is, it's so hard to see. Inclusion and support is the link that you would click on to access all the advocacy, inclusion, and support programs. I'll share a little bit more about what those programs are on the next slide. There's also a link to UMatter at UMass. That is information and resources about how students can be active bystanders, right? That if they observe a situation of bias or stereotyping in their residence halls, on campus, in another space, right? To not only just notice that and remain silent, but they have different strategies, a range of different strategies to be able to speak up, to engage and to support other students. So, we know some questions have come from parents about what does it look like to be more of an ally? What does it look like for students who have, some privileged identities to be able to support other students, right? And so those are some resources. And we know that that's not just one category, right? So that most students have something that they're able to be an ally for other students. And then that's, one of the journeys that we're supporting students around. Our single stop resources, briefly, if you're not familiar, are a great place to go to help cut through some of our higher ed jargon. As you know, there's a bursar and a registrar and all sorts of things. When a student says, hey, I need some help with money, I need some help with finding, some food resources, I need some help with getting a certain kind of question answered, the single stop resources is some very simple language to help students navigate the many different offices and systems on campus. And then finally, Diversity Matters there. That's actually a link to our Office of Equity and Inclusion that we shared at the top of the presentation that has, again, vast amount of resources and information campus-wide for students, faculty, and staff. So we just wanted to highlight a few places for you, but also that when you're having conversations with your children, with the students in your lives, that they may not remember that. And oftentimes there's more available than our students may be aware of. So you don't have to remember everything here. You can reach out to us. We're happy to help point them in the right direction, but want you to know there are a range of resources across campus. Again, within our area in particular that Shelley oversees, advocacy, inclusion, and support programs, you can see the list there include our Center for Multicultural Advancement, CMass, supporting students of color, low-income students, and foster youth, our Center for Women and Community, and a subset of that center is our Women of Color Leadership Network, our Office of Disability Services, Diversity Education and Training, which I direct, Men and Masculinities Center to support folks who identify as men or masculine. The Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, our Stonewall Center that provides support, advocacy, education around LGBTQ. Our Student Bridges program is an amazing community engagement program that connects with some local communities near Amherst to be able to create some bridges between high school students and UMass Amherst students. So bringing folks together for some mentoring opportunities and a long-standing program on our campus. The Student Veterans Resource Center supporting students who are veterans themselves or are members of military families to understand the benefits, but also a whole lot of support and community for students who belong to that affinity group. And finally, Upward Bound is again a partnership with public schools in Springfield, Massachusetts, near us, that again provides connections and resources through a federal grant to be able to support some high school youth in moving towards higher education, whether that be continuing to join us at UMass Amherst or other colleges and universities as well. So I know it's a long list, but again, want you to know just within student affairs and campus life, resources for a whole lot of students. One thing I do want to highlight is it may sound as though, okay, this is okay for different groups of students, right? You might say this is really supporting, say LGBT students or women or men or whatever. In fact, these services and these resources are offering education to all of our students, and similarly in the diversity education and training work that I lead, that's including all students to learn and deepen their understanding and develop skills and tools for dialogue and engaging with one another. So wanted to offer that reminder that no matter what identities or backgrounds your students, your children, have, they're welcome to access and encouraged to reach out into these different spaces for ways to connect up and learn. A few more things we want to share. All new students, as a part of their new student orientation and transitions programming, take part in a few different things. Better Together is our session, either in summer orientation or for some folks in the winter orientation, for new students to begin learning about some of these resources that you're sharing with you today. We also talk with them about some of the challenges of entering a community that for many of our students is more diverse than the high schools in which they have been studying and learning, the communities they have lived in, which are still largely segregated here in Massachusetts. So opportunities for them to begin to learn about ways that they can engage across those many differences. Many Voices, One Community is one of our signature programs offered during Fall Welcome. So around that Labor Day weekend, for new students moving in, we do a really incredible showcase at Mullins Center, our large arena on campus, that brings together student storytellers and student performers to kind of showcase their commitment to diversity in education through art and through storytelling and through poetry. And it is an event that brings a lot of energy, as well as a lot of kind of new awareness for many students, as well as maybe seeing themselves reflected in the stories that they hear. We do ways to bring together a lot of different stories that students share with us. And we oftentimes hear our students saying, like, I'm so glad that I felt as though I'm seen and understood here, that there's others who share some of the same experiences that I have. And finally, your intervention strategies is an introduction to resources and ways to intervene in situations of sexual assault or sexual harassment that all new students take part in. So with those things, unless you have a new student who's just joining us, aren't things that they'll take part in. But the other side of the slide are our ongoing opportunities. Again, CMAS is our Center for Multicultural Advancement and Student Success. We have 4 cultural centers on campus. They're staffed by amazing undergraduate leaders, of course, supported by our colleagues in CMAS as well. But they offer, well, just a space, one, for students to get together with other folks who may share a racial affinity with them, but also opportunities to learn, films, dialogues, all sorts of really engaging opportunities. Our defined residential communities are communities within residence halls that offer spaces, again, to share living floors with other people who may share some aspect of the same identity. So we have our Harambe floor for students from the Black or African diaspora. We have El Barrio for folks from Latinx community. We have our Spectrum floor for students identifying as LGBTQ or allies. We have our, I think I'm missing our Asian American housing, one of our largest defined residential communities, and our Kahana Sesne floor for students, Native students as well. So those are some resources that if you're not already familiar with can be really meaningful for folks who want to have an opportunity to connect with some people who they share some identities with, as then they continue into the broader campus for the rest of their lives. Registered student organizations, as you know, we have, more than we could possibly count. The ones that may most pertain to what we're talking about tonight are our cultural council that bring together students from a range of different races and ethnicities and want to kind of hold on to those traditions and find others who share those similar backgrounds, and our religious and spiritual council, bringing folks together from different religious and spiritual identities. Intergroup dialogue courses is something that my office supports in partnership with the College of Education. We offer both full semester courses and weekend seminars. We have a weekend seminar coming up next weekend that's helping students begin to learn skills for dialogue about race and ethnicity, particularly the one, our weekend seminar around student leaders. So folks who are student leaders, are they interested in being student leaders on campus, coming together to talk more about what does it mean to connect and really grapple with the differences and the issues that we have across races and ethnicities, to be able to come to more understanding and also really contribute to the kind of change that, as Shelley mentioned, this generation and our students are seeking. Mentioned Student Bridges before, and then finally we have many other signature programs, including our annual powwow, our cultural connections that UMass hosts for new students at the beginning of the year, and our Stonewall Center's speaker series with an event coming up, I believe, next week from one of the first transgender rabbis, Abby Stein, will be on our campus, just coming up later in March. So again, a lot of resources. Please ask questions, post questions, share them with Rose if you're like, what is that thing? I want to know more about it. Shelley and I would love to share more of those things. As we move towards the conclusion of our webinar this evening, we again wanted to offer some tips and some recommendations for how to engage your children and students around conversations in these topics. Again, we know that there are issues happening on our campus, there are issues happening nationally, and sometimes it's really important for students to know that their parents are in this with them, right? We know that you are our champions and coaches. You have been their partners in helping make decisions, helping guide those conversations for so many years, and that doesn't stop now. So a few things about the context. We've already said this before. Shelley has shared this. UMass Amherst is not a bubble. What is happening outside of campus is happening on campus. It is there. There's those same conversations and issues come into campus probably more than ever. If there ever was a bubble, it's not today, given social media engagement, and that's probably a good thing. But it also means that we don't think of UMass as being some kind of protected space, right? And the same challenges and the same real opportunities are here. There isn't one campus experience. Of course, that sounds obvious, but when we think about college students, or oftentimes what we see in the media kind of portrays one type of college student or a couple types. Each student's needs and experiences are very unique, not only based on their identities, but based on their majors and based on their roles on campus and where they live, whether they are a transfer student, a commuter student, a student parent. Like we are a very, vast community of folks. And so something to really, think about as there certainly isn't one campus experience at UMass. And then finally, and this is from a resource that I have cited there, I think it's from the Harvard Education School, diversity awareness is a journey, not a destination. And so it's a journey that I am on, it's a journey that we are all on, but remembering that like no one's gotten there. I'm not someone who feels as though you become woke after you've taken a course or gone to a dialogue session or something like that, that this is an ongoing journey, and that for many of our college students here, they're in the midst of that really important journey in their time with us. Few tips for how to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I will say this, in preparing for this evening's webinar, I did some research, and what I found is that there are so many resources for having conversations with children, particularly around race and ethnicity over the past couple of years, race and racism, and particularly young children. When you start to look for the resources about older children, adult children, college-age children, there aren't as many resources. Now, I think that's a wonderful thing as a parent of a 7-year-old myself. And yet, those relationships are so important still today. So a few tips that we would offer are, first, invite the conversation. Don't wait for, for your child or your student to share, hey, I'm noticing that if you're hearing about something, go ahead and open the conversation, open that door with a willingness to listen. And then again, listen to understand. It's so challenging. I find so oftentimes I listen to respond. I listen to problem solve, but just listening to understand. We encourage you to affirm your student's experience, right? First thing is like, wow, I hear that, that's important. And then maybe knowing that it might not be the full picture. Again, as we mentioned, there are so many different experiences at UMass. It may be helpful to also encourage them to consider some other perspectives or to ask some questions. As they go. So it's that affirming, but knowing that there may be other important experiences that they may want to consider. Show that you're interested, right? So if your student's talking about an article or a video in one of those gen ed diversity classes or in a program that they went to, a speaker they saw, invite them to share it with you. Watch it, watch along, and try to get a sense of what they're learning, and then continue the conversation. Encourage students to connect with the campus resources and to get involved. We just shared a snapshot of some of the many programs that we offer. And again, that spans students from every race, every gender, every religious background, right? To be able to connect up and to get into some of those conversations, maybe to push outside of their comfort zone into their growth zone and to learn something new or to challenge themselves in a way they haven't before. And then finally is just to be careful not to generalize unsubstantiated assumptions. As we know, what we'll see on social media, what we'll see on Facebook, what we'll see even on our own UMass page is a lot of information that, if not inaccurate, is certainly incomplete. And so we invite you and encourage you, yourselves, and also in those conversations to say, is that the full story? Is that the complete picture? And what questions might you ask to get a more complete understanding? So we hope those are useful tips. Again, Shelley and I would love to, engage any questions that you have and dig a little deeper into any of those topics with you. I'll pass it back to you, Shelley. And I don't know, Rose, if you have questions that are coming in as well.
Shelley, would you like to say something before I answer Dave?
Actually, I just wanted to echo Dave's remarks and to thank you, your staff, and everyone who's come, who's participating right now in this presentation. I'm sure they could be doing other things, but I'm eternally grateful and thank you, Rose. But yeah, we're here to answer any questions that may come up.
All right. Thank you so much. This was, fantastic. This was extremely informational. And I myself learned a lot from it by just watching and listening to you all talking. Those photos, they really brought it home for me. And I'm sure they did for our families as well. I don't see any questions in the chat, in the QA section, but I do have one, especially with those tips that you give families. For students, and I know we talked a lot about being an ally. We talk about if you see something, say something. For students who may have witnessed or experience racism or any type of things on campus, how would they go about reporting?
That's a great question, Rose. Believe it or not, there are many avenues to report at the university. And so we have students that sometimes report directly to our dean of students, through their intake process. There are students that report through our Office of Equity and Inclusion. They have a climate incident report. And that also can be, that information could be gathered there. Some students, depending on when it happens, if it happens within their residential, in their residence halls, then they can report it to their RA. The RA reports it to their supervisor, and they put it into the system that then is fed into our Dean of Students. So ultimately, the information does go to the appropriate individuals. And of course, we want to make sure that if this is something that is, our students sometimes report it to our UMPD, our University Police Department, you know, our UMass Police Department. That also comes, the information goes to, depending on what it is, to our Dean of Students as well. So that's a great thing, the fact that we have many avenues for reporting, but we've also heard from our students that it could be confusing. And we've heard from some of our community members as well that it could be a bit confusing. So we are actively working to streamline that process so that if a student or a faculty or staff member wants to report some type of incident, it'll be one form, and that information then will be routed to the appropriate office and individual. But there are, as I mentioned, Dean of Students, it could be reported at the Dean of Students. It could be reported in the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Our Residential Life have a process as well through RA and also through the University Police Department.
Right. Thank you so much. And based on that question as well, once it is reported, what is the next step? Because we often hear people saying, we're not doing enough, or it's taking so long and things like that. Can you give families an idea of what the process is so they know?
Well, absolutely. And I can't, you know, get into the nitty-gritty of the process, but what I can say is that every situation is different. So it really depends on the nature of the incident and, you know, the nature of the incident. So in many ways, you know, the very first thing we want to do is, you know, if we do get a climate incident report, or if there's a report that has come in through the Dean of Students, there's no question our Dean of Students are amazing professionals. They get on it and they reach out, you know, to investigate, you know, or to look into the matter, I should say. Sometime investigate triggers, you know, the official kind of UMPD capacity, but they follow up and they want to make sure that, you know, the individual or the student or, you know, is safe, right? You know, so, I mean, it's kind of tough to really kind of share because every incident is different. And so the outreach is also, you know, what it is that the individual may need is different, but there's no question that when those reports come in, if they come in through Dean of Students, the Dean of Students reviews it. You know, our associate and our assistant deans, they review it. If it comes through the Office of Equity and Inclusion and it pertains an incident with one of our students, we engage our Dean of Students. Or if it pertains a faculty or staff, then, you know, academic departments or our HR are engaged at that point in time. But there is always, there's follow-up and resources provided.
So these are the two questions that I had for you all. Again, thank you so much for doing this. I know it takes a lot to find a time that's convenient to do things like this with your busy schedules and everything like that. And I'm sure it is the same thing for families as well. You know, after work, there are a lot of other things that families need to take care of. And I really appreciate all of you for being here, families and our panelists as well, for taking the time to have that discussion and really getting to the nitty-gritty of things so we understand where UMass is coming from, but then also where our students are coming from, especially the Generation Z. So we truly appreciate your help and support with this presentation. And families, we hope this discussion was really useful to you. And And if you still have questions or concern, be sure to contact our office. We'll be more than happy to talk to you about the situation, whatever is going on, and then also forward your information to anyone, all of the departments that Dave and Shelley mentioned, so that your concerns are taken care of. We also have our next presentation, which is on April 6th at 6:30, entitled Renting Your First Place. So if you have your student going through the process of living off campus in the fall semester, this would be a good session to attend. Until then, stay healthy and go UMass.
Thank you, Rose. Good night, everyone.
Much.